Hey guys, Gary Fong here, and I wanted to show how to write an action sequence when you're writing screenplays. So it's someone asked me uh, I've shared a couple of my screenplays with people that are not in the business of reading or acting or commenting on screenplays, and they found it quite difficult because a has a lot of kind of little tools that's different. You know, some things are capitalized and all that. So, I want to kind of read you a scene and explain how that's done because yeah, I think the best way to really describe how screenplays work is someone said that it's the skeleton or the blueprint for a movie, which is true. But the way I like to describe it, and I think this really helps writers, is to understand that a screenplay is just trying to describe a movie to a blind person, okay? Because that's literally what we're doing. And I find that when I think in terms like that, I wind up doing a much better job because if I have to use words to bring out the visuals, then it just makes everything better. So, rule number one for me, what works for me, is to think that I am explaining a scene to a blind person. So, I'm going to read you the scene and I'll show you some of the mechanics that kind of go with that and what they're called. So, we'll go up here. This is kind of a long scene, so I'll wait until I get down to the bottom. Well, let's see. Let's start up here. Okay, let's start up here on scene 20. This is scene number 26. And it says external. That means outdoors. God, did I just say external? Holy smokes. I've been working on something else. Exterior. Sorry, exterior. Ooh, I did the Donald Trump. Exterior. The phone box at the drill site. Continuous. Continuous means that no time has passed between the scene before and the scene now. So the time has changed with no lapse, okay? You'll see later that it changes into, this could either be night or day or whatever. But this one is continuous, means it continues the previous scene. Hugh squats down, leaning on the telephone pole. So we want to make sure that we use just basically present tense. We don't want to use, what do they call it, progressive tense. I've been dealing with other languages, so subjunctive and verb conjugations, whatever it's called. You don't want to say Hugh is squatting down. That's faux pas. Okay, so Hugh squats down, leaning on the telephone pole. I could have said he leans on the telephone, but it's the verbs that it's active. Okay, Hugh squats down, leaning on the telephone pole. August. OS means off screen. So August is on the telephone. August, off screen. I've got exciting news for both of you. So you would hear this in audio. The sound engineering people would put this through a tinny audio sound, right? Hugh, live, holding the phone. What's that? August, off screen. You know how Claire always talks about how much she loved living in Japan? So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read this. I'm just going to read it. So listen to it like the scene is going by, and then I'll go back and I'll do the different machinations, okay? So, August, got exciting news for both of you. Hugh, what's that? August, you know how Claire always talks about how much she loved living in Japan? Hugh, yeah, why? August, we have a big project coming up in Hiroshima, and then double line. The line goes dead. August, hello? Sorry, Hugh says, August, hello? Now, here's where we get into the descriptive action scene. There's no dialogue here because I'm just talking about what the camera sees. This is for the blind person. The ground shakes. He hears a low, deafening, deep rumbling sound. He looks up at the mountain and sees a massive avalanche falling from the top of the mountain. It piles onto a mesa plateau, which quickly collapses from the immense weight of the snow. Hugh sees this and races up to the open hatch. Claire, Claire, come out. There's an avalanche coming. She doesn't answer. Claire! He puts a foot on the ladder and is about to climb down, but freezes because he sees the avalanche is growing. The avalanche grows in force. He turns to see the metal staircase leading up to the top of the 50-foot-tall drilling rig. He looks down at the hatch, up at the rig, down at the hatch, up at the rig. The rumble grows louder and louder. He shouts down the hole, Claire, honey, please! No answer. The rumble grows. He now sees trees tumbling like bowling pins, no match for the torrential force of the avalanche. Panic time. The avalanche is almost upon him. It's too close now. As loud as he can yell, "Claire!" Nothing. Frick! He closes the hatch and seals it tightly, like sealing a submarine hatch. He bolts toward the metal staircase and scurries up it clumsily. He slips on an icy step and tumbles down half a flight of stairs. The rumbling gets louder. He rights himself and climbs. The avalanche is upon him now. It buries everything beneath him, including Claire's hatch. Wind blasts at his hair. His eyes squeeze tightly shut. The force of the avalanche blows him off the staircase, but his hand manages to whip out and catch a handrail. He's tossed about like a rag doll, dangling on one arm. The roar is deafening, joined by the horrific squealing and groaning of twisting metal beams. The staircase breaks apart, sending Hugh into a free fall, falling faster than gravity into enormous white churning violence. It swallows him completely. From his point of view, White is snuffed out by darkness. The rumble becomes more and more muffled as he's being buried alive by snow. He gasps for air. We hear 3 desperate, wheezing gasps. Then silence. Fade to glaring white. And when I say glaring white, I want the audience to need sunglasses. 256 white. Prelap over white. The beeping of an ECG. Over white we hear a man's voice over heavy room echo. I think he's waking up. From Hugh's point of view, we see what he sees, a blurry, brown, amorphous blob, which separates into 4 distinct blurry forms, which then resolve into 4 distinct faces. He can make out a nurse, a doctor, August, and Abuela. Now, maybe that was easy for you to read because I read it to you, but let me just show you if you ever need to read screenplays for your boyfriend actor or whatever, or if you want to write screenplays. I learned all of this off YouTube, so I might as well pay it back and stick this back onto YouTube. Let me show you a couple of things. This right here, scene 26. This is called a logline. Okay, so exterior, the phone box at the drill site dash continuous. Okay, so now let's talk about the things that are capitalized. These are things that I'd want special effects people or props people to be able to inventory. Now, this is not what's called a production script yet, although it's getting close to one. This is at the end of comments, and you'll see that I have what's called scene numbers right here. These are scene numbers, and they're very, very handy when we're cataloging and production, and so that everyone can talk about it once it's done. Scene numbers usually don't go down until the final draft, because the final draft is, at that point, we think, of course it's never true, that nothing is really going to change too much, so we can start referring by scene numbers. I always use scene numbers because I put everything on a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, it enables me to see a bird's eye view, like a concert score for a conductor, of all the different scenes, so I can maybe move scenes around, or I can show the character arc in separate columns next to each scene. It's very, very important to me, once I start to get the first draft down, to put scene numbers on here. Okay, so now, little things after the names. You'll notice that the formatting, Dialog is always center formatted and indented by a couple of tabs. So it's really crazy. Before Final Draft came out, the first software for screenwriting, I think it was the first one, people had to do this on typewriters, or they had to do it on Word Perfect, word processors or whatever. But a lot of the movies that you saw, 50s, 60s, whatever, I mean, these poor guys were doing it on typewriters. They literally had to hit the tab and then go in, and, center justifying was really weird, but it had been such a culture of a certain look that permeated into today. I mean, Courier is obviously a typewriter font, which is a very strange font to use today, but it's extremely easy to read. And if you are in the business of movies, you're going to be reading so many screenplays that it's very irritating not to have a predictable format. So one thing that makes screenplays different is that it's unlike novels. A novel would be, she looked over the alabaster seascape and heard the waves crashing, and it hearkened her back to a time when she was in her teens, and she thought, am I really this? In her moment of existential crisis, is this what I've become? That's what happens in novels. And in novels, you hear the internal dialogue, which to me is quite annoying. I would rather see, for example, I had a scene where a person was an alcoholic, and I didn't want to say, he thought of what an unfortunate circumstance he was in to be in New Year's Eve and having to not drink amidst all the celebration around him. All I needed to do in that scene is, as the bartender comes up and he's pouring drinks for everybody, he says, what do you have, buddy? And the guy says, I'll just have ice water. That's all we need to know to say that this man is on the wagon. Okay, so that to me is much more compelling. And I think also the interesting thing about writing is that when you're stuck in a very, very tight, non-free-flowing kind of a container, like haiku poetry, right? Haiku poetry has always been really mysterious to me. It's 4 lines and then the 5th one is weird. That to me is haiku poetry. But the amount of creativity and human emotional expression that has been said with haiku poetry over the years has been phenomenal, because you have to take all of this and put it into a tight format. And that's why I really like screenwriting, because screenwriting says that you can only put on the page what you see through the lens that is showing at that time, which I think is really kind of cool. And you can't go into an internal dialogue. There's no place for me to write, he thought to himself, why am I so amazingly genetically blessed? I can't do that. But what I can do is say, he walked proudly down the lane as if his ribs were made out of titanium or something like that. I can do something like that where we see what the camera sees, and I can describe that. So everything that's in this, what we call the skeleton of a screenplay, is the language of what we call the logline, the action, and then the character dialogue right here, the dialogue. And so you can kind of switch back and forth, and so every once in a while you can do different things. But let me just kind of go through the machinations of this. So let's see where we go here. The capitals. So avalanche, that would be to the CGI people. You need to set up an avalanche. Louder and louder. That is something to tell the sound people. Now, these are actually, I tend to be quite directorial when I'm writing, because I want you to feel like you're there. And that's why I chose this action sequence to show how I write visually. I'm a visual person anyway, having been a photographer for 20 years. So things like rumble grows, it's all capitalized because I want the sound people to really crank up that subwoofer. Then he now sees trees tumbling like bowling pins, no match for the torrential force of the avalanche. You just can't, you could say, oh, the avalanche is getting bigger and meaner, but remember, we're telling a blind man that this movie is really interesting and don't turn away from the screen. So in trying to connect with a person that is, say, blind, I'm putting a lot of extra effort into making the visuals very, very clear, which also, really helps the director to see exactly kind of what goes on in the scenes. Now, I know a lot of times in screenwriting software, they say don't do a lot of directorial cues, like the fades and the dissolves, but and I understand that, you don't go horizontal pan to show the establishing scene. That's a given. But right down here, fade to glaring white. So let's talk about that. Because this is a really very tangible scene. The roar is deafening, which is a cue to the sound effects people, joined by the horrifying squealing and groaning of twisting metal beams. Now that would be Foley or sound effects. The staircase breaks apart. That's caps. Hello, CGI people. Show this 50-foot staircase breaking apart, or if you really want to do it real, regardless, it is something that if I didn't capitalize it, then it would just be, staircase breaks apart. There would be no cue to the different people that are supposed to actually work on this, sending Hugh into a free fall, falling faster than gravity. Now, I wanted to say faster than gravity because I want to convey to the director that we want to have a sense that this guy is falling at 200 miles an hour because he's being sucked in by the snow. And when I say enormous, white, churning violence, I could have said white, churning snow, but violence has a very unexpected kind of a tinge to it. Enormous, white, churning violence. Okay, I get it. I'm blind, I can't see, but I'm getting it. So it swallows him completely. In saying swallows him completely, that's suffocating. So I continue that by saying from his point of view, white is snuffed out by darkness. So just imagine, and it gets black, 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 and then it's dark. The rumble becomes more and more muffled as he's being buried alive by snow. Imagine if you're underneath an avalanche, you'd be... Then it's silence, and all we can hear is he gasps for air. He's buried under 150 feet of snow. We hear 3 desperate wheezing gasps. If I were the director or the actor or whatever, I'd make it... it would be something like that, where the gasping would be more labored and less productive. There'd be less air coming from that. And then finally silence. So we think this guy's dead. Remember, he's in darkness. The white is snuffed out by darkness, but then we fade to glaring white. Glaring white means that I want that projector to be completely so that the audience is like, wow, is this man in heaven? And the reason why I want to fade to that is because he's transitioning into another space and time, which we then were confused for a second as the audience, but fading to glaring white. And then I say prelap over white. Now, prelap means the sound comes before the audio. So prelap over white, so we're on white, and then we hear the beeping of an ECG, beep, 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 beep. And then over the white, we hear a man's voice. Doesn't matter who the man is because it's not part of the story, voiceover. And then I'm telling the sound people here, heavy room echo. I think he's waking up. Then, go right here. This is kind of a scene, but not really a scene. It's just like an angle on, right? So I didn't put a scene number here, but from Hugh's point of view, we see what he sees. So we're looking through his eyes. Does that make sense? His point of view, but we see what he sees through his eyes. He's coming about. And he sees a blurry brown amorphous blob. This is just completely defocused, which then separates into 4 distinct blurry forms. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's like, and then things are getting more sharp, which then resolve into 4 distinct faces. We can make out a nurse, a doctor, August, and Abuela. So these are people important in the story. Then we go to scene 28. Interior, a hospital room, day. Now that is a more common log line that you will see. It's like day, night, continuous. Hugh stirs about. This is one of the things. Okay, Hugh stirs about. His right ear is black from frostbite, as are the ring finger and pinky of his right hand. The doctor says he's coming about. The doctor takes out a stethoscope and listens in. The nurse takes his blood pressure. Abuela says, "Ay, mi hijo!" Hugh, very groggy, "Claire, what happened to Claire?" So we go back to Hugh's eyes, his point of view. He sees August speaking. He sounds like he's speaking through an echo chamber. "There was a massive avalanche. It buried the house," becomes unintelligible. And then we're outside of Hugh, not on his point of view, and we see his eyelids droop, and he's out. And the doctor says, "Let him rest." Then we go to exterior, the investigation scene, day. Super, which means superimposed title. It's kind of lingo for those in the know. Superimposed title. And that would be over the establishing scene. We see the investigation scene is taped off with yellow tape. Again, this is just for the benefit of the blind director. In the hole, we can see twisted metal in a pond of milky water surrounded by a thin shoreline of white goo. Again, the capitalized things are merely there to do a cue to wardrobe, props, CGI, sound effects, Foley, because they'll want to know, or the director will want to know what he needs to order. Everyone's going to go through scene 28, and scene 28 is going to go, okay, so what do we have for wardrobe? A guy in a tracksuit, whatever, right? So that's the reason why there's capitals. So you can kind of see how the convention of screenplay reading and writing. So you think it's really hard to read. Imagine how challenging it is to actually learn how to write one. That to me was the coolest freaking thing, because it's like, I like this. This is hard. I'm all about it. So this is something that I find really incredibly fun to do. And right now, this film that you're seeing here is in development. Development means it's between a producer and myself, and then directors and things like that, which means that we're trying to get down to the final screenplay, at which point then it is sold to a studio perhaps, and they do something like they create a poster, and then they find out what actors and what directors are attached to it. So the first step right now is typically go back and forth between the producer and make this the highest quality screenplay to attract the best talent that we can. One thing is important is to do what I call actor bait. And actor bait is where I give the actors some really good chops in order to make them look cool on screen, make them look like heroes. There's a scene here, don't want to show too much, but there's a scene here that I really, really love, and it makes one of the characters really, really lovable. And that's what we want to do. Stories, what's it about? What's it about is about characters. So you kind of get a feeling when someone says, what's it about? Oh, it's about a bomb and explodes and how everyone just freaks out. That to me is not a good explanation of a story. A good explanation of a story is a postal carrier comes upon a device and finds out that it has anthrax or something like that. And then the postal carrier has to dig deep to find out if he can go after the powers that be or whatever. Any story really has to be about characters first and only. So not story-driven plots, but character-driven plots. And so all that kind of, you mix that together and you'll learn all of this stuff, and then you think of a very cool kind of idea about what could be a story. And then you sit down, and then you put yourself in that person's view. Put that person, be that person. That's one thing that I found was very interesting, is I always used to look at actors and go, how the hell do you guys do that so convincingly well? The thing that winds up happening is when you actually write the dialogue, you become that person, and so the acting is really not a problem at all. And when I was doing auditions and working with actors, we would do the reads, I would always be the scene partner, because it really helped me to then see how the actor was reacting to me as the director. But also I could kind of see if we're really engaging, how it feels to be that character. Because remember, I wrote all of the parts. I made up all of the people, so the people need to be people that I believe. So when it finally the words go to an actor, and we're in a scene together, and it's a scene partner, then I can see, does that person actually match who I thought Claire might have been, or August, or Hugh? And I know these people really well. First screenplay I wrote, I finished in 18 days, which was, not anything to brag about, but the story had to come out. And so I had to learn the software and how to learn Final Draft and all that other stuff. And then I got it to an agent, and then I got an agent, a very respected agent, right away. The last two screenplays have taken about a year, and probably 8 or so rewrites each, complete rewrites. What I'm doing right now is a father-son kind of drama, but I'm had to change the genre to comedy. And so that to me, I think is one of the harder things that I've heard is being able to do rewrites or page one rewrites, because a lot of times writers get really attached to what it was that they were doing. For me, I love all the challenges that come with having to wipe entire 60 pages out because I'm taking a character or two out. And, so I don't know. The whole thing is just really fun. But screenplays, I kind of want to tell everybody just to start writing them because it's more fun than I've ever had. Having said that, I think I know a lot of writers now in Hollywood, and a lot of times what I hear about the writer's block, I know where that comes from. That comes from wanting to write great stuff. And to me, I have always felt that creativity is just creativity. Nobody said creativity is polished, amazing creativity. It's just creativity. In other words, just create. So I'm completely happy writing really awful stuff in the beginning, but getting it all out. Making sure that it's outlined, of course, because I really need to know the structure of the story. And yes, I do separate into acts, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And then I have to, follow genres. And sometimes the genre has to completely change because the characters are more interesting if they're in a comedy, which is what I'm doing right now after this one. This one's kind of done, so it's going back and forth in development. But it's terribly fun to do that. And I know that I have a zillion videos on still photography or cinematography, but now you're going to start to see some of these videos because, it was interesting. I was at a Sony event with a lot of international press people, and they said, Gary, we miss seeing your photo videos on YouTube. And I said, well, that's, I've been busy doing other things, and I've been screenwriting full time for over 2 years now. And, you go down this rabbit hole of creativity and wonder. And so don't have a lot of, unless Sony comes out with a new camera that's really exciting, then yeah, I'll take to YouTube. But anyway, so what the press people were saying, my friends that are photographic press, because I said I don't really want to infiltrate my photo channel with my new screenwriting passion. But, the overall, everyone was saying, we just want to know what you're up to. So you will be seeing more screencraft, more Hollywood, more of that, because that itself is quite an amazing adventure. And I first got into still photography because I really wanted to tell stories. The name of my wedding photography business was Storybook Weddings. So that's what I really wanted to do. And now, with the ability to be a screenwriter, I have the ability to write screenplays, which is the ultimate in storytelling. I mean, how fun is that to think that people are going to be building sets or creating costumes? This film is in the 50s, so it's a period piece, and that's going to be tremendously fun, seeing all those old Packards. I actually rode in a Packard in not a Duesenberg. Maybe I did ride a Duesenberg, but this movie's in the 40s and 50s, so extremely fun to do period pieces. You get to spend other people's money. Okay, that's it for this scene. There will be more later. Thanks for watching.